I'm speaking right now with Alan Goldberg, who's one of the 5 authors in the 2014 Hitting Challenge. And Alan, what fascinated me about you is your background as a sports psychologist who's actually worked with all levels, because one of the key questions in this whole challenge debate, if you will, was how to translate what somebody might know into what works for younger players, because that's the challenge, obviously. So when we get into talking about the key nitty-gritty of this, I mean, you have written books, you have done CDs, you've done a whole bunch of stuff that's really tried to cross those boundaries, even though you've worked with major leaguers and young players. And I think that's a good perspective to have going into this. So without any more preamble, let's just get into the meat of this. That will be the audio portion of the interview. Mm-hmm. One of the 2014 WebBall Hitting Challenge keys in the question that we asked is, how do you make whatever your techniques and training are work for younger players? And I know when I'm talking to you, I'm talking to somebody who's worked with players of all ages, right up to majors, basically. And so as a result, there's always a component where you have to talk about focus, and you have to talk about mental training, and you have to take it down to a level that makes sense for younger players. And that's where the article sort of goes into that, but I'd like to talk with you about what your general experience is in how to make the bridge between different age groups.
Well, I think the most important component is actually a nonverbal component. So if you're teaching young kids anything, the most important thing is your relationship with them. And specifically, that you create an environment where kids feel safe, where they feel safe to make mistakes and fail, because that's what learning is.
Right.
And you can have you can have an extensive knowledge of whatever you're teaching, but if in the process of your teaching you don't help kids feel safe, this is true with any age athlete, but it's especially true with the younger kids. What you know won't get transferred to them if they, like, for example, if they're afraid of making mistakes, they won't be able to integrate what's going on. So, I mean, for me, the relationship you create with younger kids is very important. They need to know that making mistakes and failing is not just something you tolerate, but it's an important part of the learning process. And actually that also ties into, when kids perform under pressure, when they're up at the plate under pressure, they need to feel safe, and they need to feel safe, like making mistakes and not worried about the outcome of the performance. Okay.
Now, tying into that, one of the things I know the article does get into is this whole idea of you talk about performance, the whole idea of what is a good performance and what is a bad performance, and an awareness of the difference. Now, mm-hmm. That's got to be part of that challenge for young players too, right? How do they measure their performance? Because I know what happens. I know what daddy ball is all about, and what happens is It's all about batting average.
Right, and that is the worst way for kids to measure success. And that's a societal thing. I mean, that in our youth sports system in general, and that goes beyond youth sports, it goes into high school and college sports, we measure success by outcome. This is the biggest mental trap for hitters. If you're in the on-deck circle or you walk up to the plate and you're thinking about, I got to get a hit, I haven't hit in 5 games, or you're thinking about your batting average, you're going to come up empty. Because what ends up happening is your focus is in the wrong place. You're in the future. You're thinking about, outcome. As a consequence, you're not going to be paying attention to the minute cues that you need to be paying attention to, which is the pitcher's release point and then the ball, which will mean you're always going to be a split second or 2 behind. And it also means that if you're worried about outcome, you'll be trying too hard. So you'll be pressing. Your muscles will be too tight. So outcome focus is, it's really, how do you define success? You define success by staying calm up at the plate, by, executing the way you've been trained, by keeping your focus on the right things, And you know as well as I do, getting a hit is totally out of your control. You can crush the ball, and one of the outfielder's gloves can get in the way.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
And you can't measure that. That's not a bad at bat. That's a great at bat. Or if you work the count and you make the pitcher work, and it's a 10 or 12 or more pitch count, and then he beats you, that's a good at bat. That's not an empty at bat. So I think with young kids, this is a challenge, is to help them change what success is. And it's not as we traditionally define, or as you're saying, how it's defined in daddy ball, Yeah,
it's gone down to the level of numbers. It's gone down to the point of practically using the numbers as a brag and boast thing. And I know from talking to other trainers, other sports psychologists recently and years ago, that the one of the problems is always the quantitative versus qualitative aspect of how you measure when you've had like a good at bat, right? And one of the things you talked about too, in terms of negativity, as a part of the process to eliminate, is one sports psychologist years ago said to me, "Don't think about polar bears." Now, as soon as you put that thought in somebody's head, it's not possible not to think about polar bears. Right. And that's that. Whatever you do, don't strike out, which is the reverse of I got to get a hit. It's the same tension building in the arms and hands, right? So we could talk about the theory of all of that for longer than we want this little interview to go on. But what I think is really key in all of this is when you talk about staying in the now, the techniques and approaches.
Okay, well, the concrete part of the theory is you can't not think. Okay, that's impossible. That sports psychologist from way back when who said don't think about polar bears he's proving a point. You can't not think. So the skill is to find something else to distract your focus with that takes you away from the thinking. The thinking's always going to be there.
Right.
But the more important thing is to train kids to have a neutral reaction to their thoughts and instead get more interested in their pre-at-bat ritual. We talk about, and any sports psychologist talks about the importance of staying in the now. How do you do that? You have to have things in the now that you pay attention to that systematically narrow your focus so that by the time the ball is released, you have a one-point focus on the ball. So that might mean that, I'll step into the batter's box and I have a set ritual and I'll dig my feet in. And while I'm doing it, I am putting my concentration on the feeling of digging my feet in and I'm looking down at my feet. And then I'll do something with my bat and my hands and I'll focus on the feeling of doing that. And then I'll take a practice swing and I'll focus on the feeling of doing that. And by controlling my concentration, that takes my focus away from the thoughts like I got to get a hit, or if I don't hit tonight, I'm not going to get fed, or I'm going to have to listen to Dad on the car ride home. So the trick is to have other things to focus on. And then the heart and soul of how, to answer your question, how do you concentrate? It's noticing when your focus leaves the right place and bringing yourself back. This is what concentration is. And this is what young hitters have to learn to do. So they have to recognize the minute their focus, for example, goes into the future, and now I'm thinking about getting a hit. And they need to bring themselves back immediately to taking a slow, deep breath and making sure my feet are set and then narrowing my focus to the release point. So it's sort of like an awareness that you've lost your focus, and the discipline to come back is the skill that we teach young hitters.
Okay, by young, though, to me, this sounds like it's really beyond the scope of a lot of young kids I've worked with in the past. So when we're talking about young, where is this most effective, I guess? What age or what group is it most effective?
Well, I think it's most effective at every age as long as you change the language that you use it.
Okay.
Every young child understands the difference between the past, the now, and the future. What did you have? So it's lunchtime. What did you have for breakfast? Okay, well, that's the past. What are you going to, what are you having for dinner tonight? That's the future. I mean, I think the trick is changing the language, and I think even like a 7-year-old boy whose concentration is all over the place understands the concept of spacing out and coming back, and it's kind of taking that and presenting it in a language that they can get. My feeling is sports psychology is not just for elite athletes. It's not just for older athletes. It's mental skills, and you want mental skills just like you want technique skills.
For life, basically, not just baseball.
Well, exactly. And I think it's you can train a kid to stay, even a 7-year-old, to know what the now is, to recognize when they leave the now, and to bring themselves back. You can train kids in that skill and developing that skill.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate then, and I think this will wrap up this part of it, because at the other end of the scale, when or what of the age levels, when are the thought processes so locked in that you find, is there a point where you find an age where there's higher resistance to trying these kind of techniques?
See, I don't think it's an age.
Okay.
Where you'll find the higher resistance. I think it's more of a personality type.
Okay.
It's
an individual thing. Individual thing.
Yeah, I think it's an individual thing. I think there's always kids who have a kind of closed model of learning, and they think that they have the answers, and they don't want to try new things. And some of that is people are uncomfortable with new things because they're not good at new things. And unfortunately, that's a very limiting kind of learning style. If you don't want to try new things, it's hard to get good at new things because, the way we go from beginner to expert in anything is by making enough mistakes. And we all start out as beginners. And one of the things that I found really kind of limiting for young kids is when they are afraid of making mistakes. And and that makes them resistant to doing new stuff, to trying new things.
I really appreciate this. Thank you very much for doing this. I think it really expands on the article. It helps us understand a little bit better about focus and that dangerously ethereal word of mental training, because I think that's a scary area for a lot of people who don't have a list of the techniques and an understanding of the language and how it can translate to all ages. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
My pleasure. Yeah.
Alan, I want to pick this up with the video sort of wrap up again just for a couple of seconds here. I know we're going to feature some of your books and CDs and whatnot on WebBall once this is all over, because I think, frankly, of all the sports psychologists I've run across over the years, I think that what you do is make it practical. I think what you do is really bring it down to a level of ability to accept and understand, and I think that's critical, because I think if anybody talks in a you're a PhD. Okay, and I think if at a PhD level, if anybody talks at that level, you're not reaching the audience we're trying to reach here. And I think I thank you so much for the fact that you are focused on those younger ages, because I think that's an incredible part of what you're doing. So thank you very much for that.
My pleasure.
Thank you.